I'm Aaron Porras, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas may be dropping a key precondition on peace talks. Qatar gets some help from ally nation Turkey for their current isolation from the rest of the Arab world, and a new discovery in northern Israel that could shake our understanding of human ancestry is revealed. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. Nikki Haley's visit to Israel is making waves, although the United States ambassador to the UN has been one of the strongest supporters of Israel in the Trump administration. She's now saying that her boss, United States President Donald Trump, sees a Jerusalem embassy move as part and parcel of an Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Her announcement that the United States is reviewing its participation in the UN Human Rights Council is also music to the ears of most Israelis. Haley's trips to the borders of the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip in the south and Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon in the north are sending a strong message to the world about the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Yesterday, she met with the Palestinian Prime Minister in Ramallah, although she did not meet with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. For Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Haley's actions at the UN have proven her to be a strong friend of Israel.
Thank you for all your help in standing up for Israel, standing up for the truth, which is standing up for America. Actually, I think it's standing up for the UN, as it was originally conceived.
In related news, United States President Donald Trump's push for direct talks between Israel and the Palestinians may be receiving a boost, as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is reportedly dropping some of his major preconditions for talks, including a freeze on settlement construction. Abbas's senior economic advisor Mohammed Mustafa says that Abbas is prepared to drop his demand to give D.C. a chance to reach a deal. The Palestinian leader began demanding a settlement freeze as a precondition in 2010 on the advice of former President Barack Obama. Mustafa says, however, that the PA has not made settlements an upfront issue this time. Additionally, Abbas may fall back on efforts to have Israeli officials prosecuted at the International Criminal Court on charges of war crimes. In an additional concession to the Trump administration, the Palestinians may stop pushing as hard for anti-Israel resolutions at the United Nations. Reportedly, the poor Palestinian economy and lack of international funding are pushing Abbas back to the negotiating table. The turmoil in the Middle East is continuing to escalate. Turkey has just approved a bill to send thousands of soldiers to Qatar. Of course, this follows Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and other Sunni Arab states breaking off relations with the pariah-turned Gulf state. All Qatar's land borders are now closed, and as Saudi Arabia and the UAE were its biggest food suppliers, it's now looking for other countries to import food from. Just yesterday, the Turkish parliament passed legislation to deploy troops to its military base in Qatar in a show of support with its ally. Of course, Saudi Arabia is saying that if Qatar wants good relations with its neighbors, it must stop supporting Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. According to Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir, Qatar's continued financial and diplomatic support for these Islamist groups undermines the stability of the Palestinian Authority and Egypt. Now, Hamas is on the defensive.
نحن نستغرب ونستهجن في حركة حماس أن يصدر في مثل هذه الأوقات تصريح يؤلب على حركة حماس ويدفع بعض الدول والاتجاهات بمقاطعتها وحصارها في وقت تثبت حماس للقاصي والداني أنها ملتزمة بقضيتها الوطنية لا تتدخل في شؤون أحد تقاوم الاحتلال وجهتها القدس.
Israel has not gotten involved in this conflict, but more pressure on Hamas can't be a bad thing from their perspective. Still, it's not all just about Qatar's support for Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Their closeness to Iran and their Al Jazeera satellite channel with its arguably pro-jihadi line are also unacceptable to most Sunni Arab states. Joining me today in the studio to discuss the ongoing rift between Qatar and the Arab world is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, who served for 25 years in the IDF military intelligence and is an expert in Middle East affairs and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mordechai Kedar, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
All right, so my first question is, Saudi Arabia and much of the other Sunni states are now demanding that Qatar stop their support for Hamas, Iran, and the Muslim Brotherhood. What's the reality, that they actually comply with this request?
Well, it all depends on the pressure, because the more they twist the hand of the Emir of Qatar, the more he will be likely to succumb to the pressure. because he wants to survive. And he knows very well that if he doesn't agree to what Saudi Arabia now demands, he might be ousted. I mean, Saudi Arabia will invade Qatar and will kick him out with Qaradawi, the sheikh which he brought from Egypt, and the 500 Muslim Brotherhood activists who found asylum in Qatar, including Hamas representatives and Azmi Bishara as well. They will clean the country from all those who hate Saudi Arabia, and they will nominate somebody from the Al Thani family, his family, to control the country, to do what he's told and not to do what he's not told to do.
So you think Saudi Arabia might invade Qatar?
Well, the more credible this threat is, the more likely that the emir will succumb. Because he knows that Saudi Arabia can do it, and they will do it, if he doesn't succumb to their demands.
Okay, so I mean, so I guess the follow-up thing is, Saudi Arabia, are they complying with their own request? Because, historically they've had a checkered past with supporting terrorists as well.
Well, when it comes to Qatar, Qatar has a very long account with the Arab world. It started really in 1996 when Qatar launched the Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera, the agenda of Al Jazeera is a campaign, a media jihad against the Arab regimes, against Israel, against America, against the West, against Westernism, and push forward the Muslim Brotherhood wherever they are. Hamas, Nahda in Tunis, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Syria. And this was what shook the Arab world for many years and caused the Arab Spring in the end of 2010. And everybody's more than sure that this was the process which Al Jazeera actually pushed the people to the street in order to rebel against the regime. So definitely Qatar bought this attitude which Qatar suffers from today with goodwill. Secondly, Hamas sponsored, Qatar sponsored so many terrorist groups, including Hamas and many others, Jabhat al-Nusra, and others in the all Arab and the Islamic world. And they all know it, and they know very well. However, many are actually afraid of Qatar because Qatar can use the money against them. So they shut their mouths and let Qatar do whatever they like, as long as Qatar doesn't shake the boat too hard. However, what happened 2 weeks ago when Trump came here, and Trump in his speech talks about Hamas as a terror organization and Iran as a state which promotes terror, and all of a sudden Qatar says that Hamas is a liberation organization and Iran is a good state, only because Qatar and Iran share the same gas field and make big money out of this gas field. So Iran is actually in bed with Qatar, and this is definitely something which the Arab world doesn't like.
So basically they were forced, Qatar was basically forced to defend their interests, with Trump's speech, and then the fallout is this. This really truly is a response to Trump. It's not, Saudi Arabia coming out all of a sudden and saying, hey, stop funding terror.
I won't be surprised if someday will come and we found out that actually the United States actually is behind this Arab campaign against Qatar because of the role of Qatar in this terrorism. However, don't forget that Qatar actually hosts the biggest American airbase in El Aidid in Qatar, which is actually the center of the activity, of the aerial activity in the Middle East for the United States of America. They host the Fifth Fleet in the sea, and there is a whole matter of facilities of control of the American army in Qatar. So Qatar here actually plays on both sides. On one side, she supports America by hosting all these bases, but on the other side, supports all those who fight against America and wage terror against the West. So this is actually the double facet play of the Qataris, and apparently Trump wants to put an end to this. Either you are with us or you are against us. You cannot hold the rope on both sides.
All right, so now the Turkish parliament just passed a resolution that they're going to send troops to Qatar. What does that mean? Is there a possibility of war? Is there, they're building an army, apparently.
Look, today everything is possible. Qatar might be a target, real target, of the Saudi army, which will, in half an hour, will capture the whole place in order to get rid of the family, the ruling family, or part of the family, those who fell captive in the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood, and Saudi Arabia can put somebody else to replace to replace this family in Qatar.
All right. Well, Dr. Mordechai Kadal, thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
The United Kingdom is under siege as following 3 major terror attacks in as many months, 2 kosher restaurants in the city of Manchester have now just been hit by arson attacks that police are calling anti-Semitic hate crimes. On Friday night, surveillance cameras recorded 2 people throwing a firebomb at the Tam Deli. Fortunately, the weapon failed to ignite, prompting the attacker to throw a stone through Tam's front window instead. This is the second time arsonists have targeted the Tam Deli, too. A gasoline bomb was thrown at the restaurant just last May. The JS restaurant, however, wasn't so lucky. Early in the morning on Tuesday, vandals forced open a window at the restaurant and poured a flammable liquid inside, causing a fire. Thankfully, emergency services arrived minutes after the fire had sparked, and the damage was less serious than it could have been. The JS restaurant has posted photos of the scene on its Facebook page, with the owner writing a message of thanks to the local police and CST for the hours they've spent going through CCTV footage to put a picture together of the attack. Police are increasing patrols in the area and have assembled an investigation team to work on these linked crimes. In other news from Britain, today's the big day. The British are going to the polls to elect a new parliament, and current polls are suggesting that the controversial Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn is on track to cut into incumbent Prime Minister Theresa May's majority. ILTV's Max Keisler is here with more. Max, fill us in. What's happening on the ground?
Well, there's been a big shift in the polls since May called for elections. You know, when that happened, she was looking at a supermajority, but that was a long time ago. Corbyn has surged in the polls, and he's even surged since the Manchester attack, and that's surprising.
Why is that surprising?
Because Corbyn's really somewhat of an out-there candidate. He has this association with these Islamist terror groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. He's called them his friends. But more than that, he has an association with the IRA, and even in the 1980s, he was inviting them to speak at Parliament, and this is a time when the IRA was sending bombs off all across England. So his supporters aren't really bothered by this, and that's amazing.
So what does this mean for Israel?
You know, I'm sure Israel would prefer that Theresa May retain her majority. She's seen as very sympathetic to Israel, and Corbyn, to say the least, is not.
All right, well, let's see the rest of your report.
When Theresa May called for a snap election in late April, she had good reason to believe she'd leave with a strong mandate for her government and for her Brexit negotiations. But current polls are seeing the Conservatives lose around 20 seats in Parliament, and some polls even have the controversial populist Jeremy Corbyn leaving the election with a narrow majority. For the average Israeli, this seems like bad news, as Corbyn is not a well-liked figure in Israel. He's called terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah his friends, and his links to radical groups are even cause for concern in the UK. Many are uneasy with his 1980s association with the IRA, but for his young voters, his populist message is a big selling point. In truth, Corbyn's anti-Zionist message has resonated with some of his fanbase. In Bristol, Corbyn supporters put up a banner depicting Theresa May with Star of David earrings, and Jewish residents of the city understandably took this as anti-Semitic. Theresa May, as opposed to Corbyn, is receiving criticism in the UK for not campaigning hard enough or debating Corbyn publicly. Now, in the last days before the election, she's been drawing attention to Brexit and the possibility of a Labour majority.
And there is a stark reality, which is that if we lose just 6 seats, then the government loses its majority.
We'll know in a few hours what the people of the UK have decided.
After gunmen attacked the Iranian parliament in Tehran yesterday, United States President Donald Trump put out a statement which is drawing praise from some and condemnation from others. In a 2-sentence press release issued yesterday afternoon, Trump wrote that we grieve and pray for the innocent victims of the terrorist attacks in Iran and for the Iranian people who are going through such challenging times. But striking a hawkish note, he then added that we underscore that states that sponsor terrorism risk falling victim to the evil they promote. 12 Iranians died as a result of the attack on parliament and a religious shrine, and ISIS has reportedly claimed responsibility for both. Incidentally, the president's statements coincide with a Senate vote to impose new sanctions on Iran over its continued supply of weapons to terrorist groups and its ballistic missiles program. The Trump administration has been taking a hard line against Iran's promotion of terrorism throughout the Middle East and the world, to the pleasure of Israel, of course, which has long been sounding the alarm about the Iranian nuclear threat. On the other hand, for Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, one of the supporters of Barack Obama's controversial Iran nuclear deal, she says that Iran has elected a moderate government and that it's time to give Iran the opportunity to recover and set a new course. The Iranian foreign minister agrees, calling Trump's statements repugnant. Now, the ultra-Orthodox Haredi community of Israel is one of the nation's largest as well as one of the nation's poorest. Can a nonprofit initiative hoping to turn Haredi women into small business owners actually turn it around? Rabbi Shmuel Bloom's Temech organization has already helped more than 2,000 Haredi women open their own businesses and has aided another 6,000 women in finding work. On Wednesday, they held a conference at the Jerusalem International Convention Center on Business Development and Management, where hundreds of women attended. Temech helps Haredi women with training, provides them office space in Jerusalem, and tries to help them with the knowledge deficit that many women suffer from as the first business owners in their family. Most Haredi men, on the other hand, do not work, instead spending every day studying Jewish religious texts in a kollel. Unfortunately, while they do receive stipends from the government to account for this, high real estate costs and large family sizes of 10 or more kids often means that for most of the Haredi community, financial stability is still a long way off. Now, art can be found anywhere, from the great outdoors to your local dumpster. And our next guest is an artist who creates his artworks by scavenging through flea markets in search of discarded mechanical objects. Joining me today in the studio is Markos Attic, whose works have been exhibited at Ra'anana's Lake Gallery, in the Kanti Studio, in various galleries in Jaffa, and in street shows on Chen Avenue in Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, so my first question is, when did you first start making art?
Wow, I think in the early 70s and 80s, at the exhibitions in Tel Aviv, at Sderot Han, what we called. And during that time, I was still working at the Israeli aerospace industries.
Oh, wow.
And I have had time to do that. Today, actually yesterday, I have had an opening at the Opera House in Tel Aviv. A very big exposition. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was a nice gathering. And at the Opera Foyer, I have a very big exposition. It was supposed to be open till starting of July, but I have been asked to extend it till August. So maybe it means that they like it.
Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, I love your work. I mean, we're seeing it now.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And I must say, yeah, like, you know, you can tell, and of course I read your bio, but you can see that it's very steampunk inspired.
Absolutely.
And where, you know, so why steampunk? How did that kind of work into your aesthetic?
I'm an avid reader of science fiction, and one of the days I have had the opportunity to read some steampunk novels, and I was intrigued. I was very curious. I looked for it. I looked for steampunk, and this is actually steampunk. Again, I used my technical background, and I tried to combine the steampunk with new age electronics, with new parts, because if you found an object, which is a nowadays one, like this is an old object, but still I put a steampunk mark on it.
Sure.
But if I found parts that are new, starting from diesel machines or engines, through new parts like gauges or so. This is, by the way, it's hand operated, no switches. It's worked through your body. No fear, no problem.
Of course. I mean, these are awesome. So, I mean, just for people who don't really get into artwork, who don't really understand the different aesthetics and the different movements, you know, when you say steampunk, what do you mean by that? You know,
this
exactly.
movement started actually in England during the 60s and 70s. It started as a movement, I would say something countered the existing art in terms of literature, fashion, and sculpture, and so on. And the steampunk is based upon the era of the Victorian era, which took it forward, meaning they still stay with the steam engines, but nowadays, meaning computers would work on steam, ships would fly, and airplanes, and so on.
And it'd all be steam powered.
Absolutely. Right. And now the new electronics, digital electronics, and so on. So they stay in those days, but looking at the future. There is a cynical part of the human nature, and you can see it like predictions in George Orwell's
sure.
in
1984.
But my work, I took it with a part of humor, with part of goodwill, and I have not let the dark part of steampunk to influence me.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's that kind of like the lighthearted steampunk of functionality with the Victorian aesthetic, but then at the same time, you know, there's that kind of evil, almost, you know, Dracula type.
I would say so. I would say
know,
so. I put some hope.
features.
I put some humor.
Sure.
And I took also the aesthetics from the Far East. My work brings me to the Far East. For many years I worked there. I still do.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see some parts.
Sure. Yeah, no, I could see, you know, with the globes and the different, you know, the filigrees and the nice, beautiful
filigranes,
carvings,
especially.
and exactly. So I wanted to move on. I wanted to talk about the eco art movement. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yes. The humanity nowadays, and it's not start today, but of course we are a consumer, and by large, and we discard everything. Look at the phones, the mobile phones that every now and then, every 3 months you have a new one. Look at the computers, look at the cars. Years ago, you used to have a car for 30 years and everything, on the contrary, was stated that it would stay. So the accumulation of waste, it's huge, it's enormous. My minimal part is to try and to reuse. So when you look at this art, you can say, okay, I'm doing reuse. By doing reuse, you contribute to eliminate, not of course, the full waste, but you do reuse, and you, on a smaller scale, you gain some.
Markos Attic, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much, and I would ask the Tel Aviv audience to come, and specifically for children, it would be very interesting and also educational. And I appreciate for inviting me here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. Now, in an incredible new discovery that is rewriting human history as we know it, the Israeli Antiquities Authority has just revealed that Neanderthals conducted much of their life out in the open landscape. More specifically, Neanderthals in the Levant were not just simple cavemen, as they've come to be known. According to the press release, quote, "The study focused on the skeletal remains of 2 human individuals from the open-air site of Ein Kashish on the banks of the Kishon stream in northern Israel. The analyses show that these bones represent the first Neanderthal remains outside caves in the Levant and are among the very few of such finds worldwide. The remains were dated to the late Middle Paleolithic period between 70,000 and 60,000 years ago by Dr. Naomi Porat from the Geological Survey of Israel." End quote. These new findings call into question much that we thought we knew about our early ancestry. Among the chief theories put under the microscope is the story of how the Neanderthals died out. The popular theory is that they had a difficult time adapting to the new climate at that time period. The study also adds tremendous amounts of color to the picture of the Neanderthals' cohabitation with early modern humanity. One thing is for sure, though, according to this study, quote, "Despite possible genetic flow between Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens populations and climatic fluctuations, the Neanderthals in the Levant were a resilient population that survived successfully in the region when modern humans reached it, again, some 60,000 years ago." End quote. Enroll in eTeacher's online Hebrew courses and quickly discover that it creates the deepest connection to Israel that you could ever imagine. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. The Israel Antiquities Authority, in conjunction with professors and doctors from around the country, have just discovered some amazing 60,000-year-old Neanderthal remains. And so today's word is etzem, meaning bone. Atzamot, or bones, are pretty important, and not just because we'd all be floppy blob people without them. In etzem is also the core or the essence of a thing. That's why in Hebrew you can say be'etzem, meaning actually or basically, though literally translated it means in bone. Basically, or be'etzem, I'm just trying to say that etzem is a great word, so use it. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy with a low of 71 or 22 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow, expect to get hit by a heat wave with very hot and dry weather and a high of 87 or 31 degrees Celsius. The temperatures are supposed to cool down a bit over the weekend, becoming seasonal after that. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.54 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for watching.